Welcome back to Hardware Unavailable, because I imagine that's what we're mostly talking about in this episode. It seems to be all we talk about these days. I am seriously considering changing the name of the channel. But anyway, part 3, Q&As, Patreon questions. So we will be answering quite a few questions from our lovely Patreon members in this episode. So sit back and hopefully we have some good ones for you. So let's get into it, Tim.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, first question here is from old mate Nick. And Nick asks, given the big cutting-edge foundries like TSMC and Samsung only have a limited amount of capacity at any given time, do you think semiconductor shortages are something we're going to have to live with from now on? Yes or no. I think they'll obviously be looking to increase capacity, so that'll help in the future. But as we've alluded to already a number of times in this Q&A series, it really seems to be sort of a perfect storm of things. So we've got unprecedented levels of demand because of people being locked in their houses and turning to computer gaming and then getting addicted to computer gaming and now want to build new computers and things like that. So demand has gone through the roof, as you guys know, and then the current supply was also more limited than normal because of COVID. So a whole heap of things happen there. So I think we are in sort of unusual times, let's say. So I think things will improve. But as we've always seen, haven't we? When a new product comes out, it sells out straight away and people get upset and annoyed. And for what can now be considered a brief 2-month period, it is difficult to purchase.
Yeah, and cutting-edge foundries have always had a limited amount of capacity. If anything, with Intel sort of floundering a little bit and both TSMC and Samsung coming up to match and exceed them in terms of their capabilities, there's more capacity than we've ever had in terms of sort of your leading edge nodes and that sort of thing. So,
just as we said, perfect storm, extreme demand, and then there's been supply issues globally because of, pandemic and all that sort of stuff, and we're still feeling the effects of that. So, but yeah, I think some point in the future, things will get better.
With the increased MSRPs and scalpy price tags of the current GPUs, or maybe for at least the remainder of first quarter and first half of the year, with these absurdly increased prices, do you think that the current value compared back to Turing is actually worse or on par or still better?
Good question. It's really hard to answer because we don't really know, and this is a lot of people have asked us to do updated videos with the new cost per frame, but I don't know what the numbers are. Because take the 3080, for example, there are MSRP cards listed at major retailers such as Newegg.com. However, we don't know how many of those cards are coming in when they get their new shipments. And we also don't know that once supply does start to meet demand, if those MSRP cards will creep up in price. So, yeah, but is it worse than Turing? Well, obviously supply is significantly worse than Turing. So, and there's certainly, if you're paying scalper prices, I would say that's certainly worse than Turing.
Is it? Oh, because if you think, for example, even if you had a 3080 at $1,200, which is well above its MSRP, it's still faster than a 2080 Ti at that price point.
It's still faster.
So it'd be worse value, or it would be the same value if a 3070 was $1,200, wouldn't it? So unless we're seeing it blow above that, is it? I don't
the 2080 Ti is probably about the only card you can give that example for because it was the only one that was horrendous in terms of cost per frame. I put it this way. It's not much better if it is better.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's much better.
So, and I think parts like the 3070 are probably worse at scalper prices. Having said that, I'm not really familiar with the prices because I mostly ignore scalper prices because they are irrelevant to me because I'm certainly never going to pay them and I'm never going to recommend you guys pay them.
I think this next question kind of follows on from what we were just talking about. What are your plans regarding the performance per dollar chart of the 3060 review if it's over the MSRP? Nvidia and AMD's fake launch MSRP is getting out of hand.
Well, as we've done in the past, there would be an MSRP chart. So in a perfect world where all the cards sell at their MSRP, we would do that comparison. So at least that gives you a baseline somewhere to begin. And then the problem with that kind of content is we don't know what the 3060 sells for. And again, as I said, there are MSRP listed cards. I don't know how many of those orders are being fulfilled, but they are there. And then when the 3060 comes out, I can't make up an imaginary price for the day one review. I can't go, well, because this was overpriced by this percentage, let's jack the 3060 up and say that's going to be the typical asking price. And again, it all becomes really irrelevant when they're out of stock 99% of the time. I think that's the primary issue.
Yeah, if you're going to give like a non-MSRP price, it would either have to be what we've done previously, where it's kind of like a typical price. You could find it on Newegg.
But again, it becomes silly because value is out the window, guys. Value's gone.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not buying it near the MSRP, who cares? It doesn't matter whether you buy AMD or Nvidia, you're just buying the one you can actually get your hands on, which makes the head-to-head comparisons pointless. And value's gone out the window, so who cares? You're just buying a graphics card because you're desperate to get whatever you can get.
Pretty much.
So it just becomes, it's just silly. I don't see the point. So if it was a situation where Nvidia were massively price inflated, but AMD were sometimes in stock, but at the MSRP, then you would have to honor the MSRP on AMD's side and maybe jack up the price on Nvidia's side. But they're both crap. So it's like the value argument's out the window, and who cares about MSRP? I mean, we all care about MSRP, but who cares about it when neither of them are meeting it and you can't buy either product? It's like, that's why I'm over it at the moment, just like you guys are.
Next question. Tim, what do you think of Nvidia lowering the requirements for Nvidia, I think, G-Sync Ultimate from HDR 1000 to HDR 400? I talked a little bit about this in my news video, so I think this question was probably from before I made that video, but I'm not a huge fan. I think we've talked a lot about Nvidia's naming of things in the past not being great, but I actually think Nvidia G-Sync Ultimate was one of their better brands that you could sort of put on a monitor and you would know for sure that it was going to give you a proper HDR experience, because there weren't that many monitors that met the requirements. There was maybe a couple per year that had good full array local dimming or were a large OLED, basically a TV. And yeah, they were really strict with only giving the best of the best monitors that brand. So you could search G-Sync Ultimate monitors if you wanted an HDR monitor that gave you proper HDR. Now that they've lowered the requirements, you can't even do that anymore. It's not useful as a brand anymore once they've diluted it, because it's no longer you're getting a good HDR experience. Now you're getting some sort of HDR experience and you have to do research. I don't want to do research. I just want Nvidia to tell me what the good products are. So they've
Nvidia
really
Ultimate bait and switch.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those things where it was fine as it is. So there's no need to dilute it, because they could already be selling non-Ultimate monitors with G-Sync branding. So what's the incentive there to make these G-Sync Ultimate monitors? What are they competing with?
Well,
there's no competing brand.
What is the incentive for Nvidia to do it? Are they making more money now by charging a premium to get that associated with the monitors?
I don't know. That must be it, because it doesn't make any sense otherwise.
It's always money.
Yeah, it's probably money, isn't it?
All right, my question is, sometimes you can get burnt out reviewing the same material over and over. Do you guys ever see yourself swapping just to add a little bit of something fresh? For example, Steve does monitor reviews while Tim does GPU reviews. Well, I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. If I was to do monitor reviews, I would be reading word for word Tim's script in a very robotic voice, because it's all over my head, and yeah. That's why Tim does monitors, and why I've never done monitors, because not something I'm familiar with, not something that I've put countless hours of time and research and dedicated to doing all of that. As for GPU reviews, Tim could do them quite comfortably. I'm not sure how super keen he is to go benchmarking 30 plus games, but he could definitely do it. But I think he would much rather not. I don't think it would spice things up for him having to do my job. And while I would certainly find pronouncing the various monitor names very interesting and challenging, I don't think that content would be better coming from me somehow. So that's...
Yeah, usually there's enough fresh releases every year that it kind of keeps things moving. Like, we're not reviewing like first gen Ryzen over and over again every year. We get the new Zen processor, we get new Intel stuff, we get new
You're
GPUs,
definitely better sticking to the one type of subject or subjects. And I've been doing this for like 20 years now. And I've mostly done in that time sort of CPU, GPU, motherboard type content, which I enjoy the most, which is why I do it. So, it's not bad from time to time to do something slightly different, like a build guide or something like that. But, yeah. So anyway, no, we'll be keeping Tim doing the monitor reviews, that is for sure. All right, next question here. Was wondering if you could share with us in more detail on your plans, targets, and what else you guys aim to achieve in 2021. I think I can speak for both of us when I say we just want to keep improving what we're doing. And I was pretty happy with what we achieved in 2020, to be honest with you. We both exposed a reasonable number of crappy products, but in all instances, we had those products either pulled from market or re-released as better products, or improved in some way. So that's good to see. So I'm pleased with that. We gave a lot of, I think, good buying advice. So that was all good. A lot of good testing. We're both looking to improve testing as always. I'm expanding into a much, much bigger area. So that will allow me to do more testing and different types of testing that I haven't been able to do previously. So yeah, just more of the same really, but hopefully slightly better.
Yeah, I think we've talked many times in the past about how our goal is not really to turn Hardware Unboxed into a massive Linus Media Group type business where we have
definitely never going to
30
happen.
employees. It's just not going to happen. So for us, it's more about just improving the sort of content that we're already making as opposed to growing the channel to make more money, to sustain more employees, which a lot of YouTubers do with their business, and that's fine. We're just, I guess, more interested in what you were saying, like making sure that when we do benchmark a card that we're doing the best job that we can of that, have got the best testing available, and that's pretty much it. All right, next question. Regarding stock and price gouging on RTX 3000 and RX 6000, even big retailers sell them at way higher prices, but at the same time, Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5 on the same big retailers are sold at MSRP even though they are also sold out. Does Sony and Microsoft prevent price hiking? Doesn't Nvidia and AMD, or can't AMD and Nvidia do that as well? I think it's a really interesting question.
Well, it's more complicated because, first of all, Sony and Microsoft are selling these things.
That's right. They're directly selling them.
Yes, whereas AMD and Nvidia are selling their product to a third party who are then selling the product. So it's kind of hard for them to do like a price fixing type situation where, AMD sort of told us that they had enabled AIBs to hit the MSRP prices, and they assured us that would happen in 4 to 8 weeks, which we were very skeptical of the time.
Whoops.
Didn't happen. So, a bit of a fail there on AMD's behalf, but we haven't made any more content talking about that because we pretty much said all we needed to say, 2 months ago on the subject. But there's just more moving parts there and more things that are out of their control, and they can try and control that. In some regions, it may not be legal to control that sort of stuff. So,
I guess the example where this would only make sense is if you're talking about like a retailer selling an Nvidia Founders Edition card or an AMD reference card from those companies directly. So like an Nvidia Founders card.
And we have an example of those selling at MSRP.
So if you're talking about, let's say, Best Buy, for example, it would be a bad situation if they were selling an Nvidia Founders Edition card above MSRP, but then selling a PlayStation 5 at MSRP, even though both are very sought after products. But I don't really think that's happening, as we've sort of talked about through this. It's been more AIB cards being sold above price, which could be a range of issues. It might not even be the retailer's fault. It could be a distributor. It could be the AIB pricing the cards above what's required. There's so many different things. And I would love Nvidia and AMD to get out there and hold these AIBs to specific prices. But it's a very different situation to sort of your PlayStation 5 where Sony can just say, this is the price because it's our product and this is what you'll be selling it at. So I guess it's also kind of a bit of more of a public facing product. Like there'd be much more outrage if retailers were increasing the price of a mainstream product like a PlayStation 5 or an iPhone or something when they're in high demand, as opposed to sort of more our niche sort of thing.
Steve, do you think it's worth revisiting the RTX 3000 series, RX 6000 series, and Ryzen 5000 series when stock becomes more available for the average consumer to buy in a few months? Do you think the performance of these components would have changed compared to the initial benchmarks you made, or would they be around the same? In a few months, nothing's really going to change. But having said that, we are constantly doing updated content anyway. Shortly after this Q&A series goes live, I will have a big benchmark video comparing the RTX 3080 and RX 6800 XT in a heap of games at varied resolutions and all that sort of stuff. So on the new Zen 3 test system. And of course, I'm updating all my GPU data to the 5950X. Slow process, but I'm working on it. So we're always updating stuff anyway, but yeah, in a few months' time, it's certainly unnecessary for reviewers to revisit these things because their recommendations and things will not have changed since the original review. Yep. Basically, they will revisit that when new products come to market, such as, their opinion on Zen 3, whether you should buy that will be reevaluated when the 11th gen core series comes out, as an example. To both of you, what type of case person are you? What type of case person are you, Tim? If you were able to summon your perfect case in front of you, what would its main features be? So RGB or plain, matte or glossy, bright or dark. Well, if we're sticking to sort of simple terms like that, I don't mind RGB if it's done sort of tastefully, like the system that I have in the background of my set, which is the sort of red and blue static lighting. I quite like that. My personal system, it's all left on rainbow because it's in a box and I never look at it. So it's like it's a workstation, and it just happens to have some Trident Z RGB memory, not because it's RGB, just because I had it. But as for the case itself, I think I'm more into sort of darker cases, so black type of cases, more dark than bright, if that's sort of the theme, I suppose. I prefer matte than glossy for virtually all things. And yeah, just more plain than RGB, I think. I dig a lot of like the Be Quiet cases and stuff like that, like the dark sort of theme they've got going on in some of those. What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I tend to find most PC cases look very ugly, in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan of most designs that people come up with. I tend to like just very simple stuff. Like, again, I leave my RGB on rainbow because I don't really care too much about it. But yeah, if I was going for looks, I'd like something just very, very simple design. Like, I know Gamers Nexus would probably be rolling over in their grave when I say that I don't want a mesh front panel on my PC. I think they look terrible. So if I was going for aesthetics and not performance, then definitely not mesh front panel with visible fans. I think I really doesn't watch this. I really liked Corsair's old cases where they had like an aluminium, like brushed aluminium front on it. Mm-hmm. Obviously that is not great for airflow, but yeah, those cases are stuff that I've liked in the past. Sort of, yeah, just very, very simple designs. Nothing crazy. I don't need to see the RGB. I don't even need a window on the side, really, because usually just tucked under my desk. So really, the front panel is all I see. So yeah, that's what I'm sort of like. Again, dark cases. Not a huge fan of white.
You're going to trigger Steve because he's like, you don't care what it looks like, you don't care to see it, but you're happy to choke it for airflow.
Well, I mean, this is purely talking about design aesthetics. So if I was actually buying a case, because I don't really look at it too often, I would probably choose a more performance-oriented case because that would make more sense. But yeah, if it was going to be visible, then I'd want it to be nice sleek front panel, maybe limited windowing or no windowing on the sides, and just nice quality materials. Not as much plastic, but like nice metals, nice finishes on the metals.
Yep,
I think that would look quite good.
Well, I have to admit, for all of my test systems, I don't use cases with mesh panels for like VRM testing, for GPU testing. The Corsair Obsidian 500D is typically what I use, so that's got a solid panel with some vents down the other side. I think you've got one just down there, actually.
Yeah, I've got one. Yep.
So that's a good case for testing, I find, because it's not amazing on airflow, but it's not terrible. And I think for testing, you want something that's... So I guess, again, for that, I answered it for like a personal type thing. Yep. For a test system, the main thing is hinged doors.
Hinged doors, absolutely.
The 500D is so good because we do all of our testing exclusively in cases, so no test benches. So all graphics cards, and that's proven to be very important because it helped us discover the issue with the Asus Strix 5700 XT graphics cards where the heatsink eventually pulled away from the PCB because it didn't have sufficient mounting pressure, and no other reviewers noticed that. All the established tech sites all photographed using a test bench and reported excellent thermals. And from day one, my thermal data wasn't as good as theirs, and people were questioning my data. And then eventually came out that there was a fundamental problem with the card, and we showed that because we mount it normally in a case. And also cases are good for thermals. You have it on a test bed. It's not
a realistic
No, it's
environment.
not. Yeah, it's not first of all, it's not how the card's usually oriented. It's not how the air is usually circulating around it. So cases with hinged doors are the way to go for test systems. Very good.
Hinged doors on both sides as well. Both sides. So you can get in and out easily.
It'd be nice if there was doors, hinged doors, where you could clip them closed.
Yes.
Because seriously, why does every hinge door case just have them flapping around? So
I think there's been ones where there's been like a button on the top that like releases a latch that you can then hinge on some.
Yeah, I'm not sure what ones that is.
I've had a few of those.
Like the Corsair magnetic ones are great. If you sit the case there and you open and close, beautiful. But the second you got to tilt it on its side to work on it, the other door goes flying off or whatever. You have to remove the doors first, which for most people not a big deal because they lay
in the one place.
They lay the case on the side for upgrades once every however often. So they just take the case doors off, do that, put them back on. But because I'm putting mine up and down multiple times per day, it becomes a bit tedious having to take the glass panel off all the time. I've actually got a spot where I stand the glass panels. Anyway, moving right along.
Tim, you've pretty wholeheartedly recommended DLSS where available, but for me, image in motion looks smeary as hell, and that's sort of backed up by Gamers Nexus testing with Cyberpunk, which showed DLSS creating an overdrive-like halo image. My question, is this unique to Cyberpunk, and am I going just going mad? And if I'm not mad, where do we draw the line, considering on one hand we have low response, high refresh monitors designed to limit this, but a tech for FPS gains is doing it anyway? DLSS is very complicated because and this is why I guess we don't benchmark it with enabled very often, because the performance and image quality that you get varies a lot depending on the resolution you're playing at, the overall performance you're getting. DLSS gives you lower gains at higher frame rates. The lower your performance is, the more of a gain it's going to give you. So yeah, I mean, if you're, for example, playing Cyberpunk at 1080p or even 1440p at times,
1080p especially,
I think that the image quality is not quite good enough using the quality DLSS mode. It'd be great if there was a mode above quality. So it's not native rendering, but it sits in between quality and native rendering. I think that would be really good for 1080p and 1440p, whereas the minimum I would use at 4K is quality. So I don't really think the balanced or performance modes are that great. So I certainly get where you're coming from. It is possible to not get great image quality out of DLSS, and if you're using the performance mode in particular, yeah, I think it's likely that you'll get some of these issues that you're seeing here. So yeah, from that perspective, I think DLSS is still worth using because the image quality, it's not identical in most games. It can be, but I think in most examples that we have now, I'd say it's not quite as good as native, but you're getting a quite substantial performance uplift. So it's kind of a bounce of the two things. Would you take slightly lower image quality for quite a big boost in performance, or would you want it the other way around where you get slightly better image quality? And that could be a personal preference type thing. Obviously, some people are more sensitive than others.
It gets very complicated when the main reason a lot of people are enabling DLSS, especially at 1080p, is so they can enable ray tracing.
Yes.
So you're enabling this feature to get more frame rates, so this other feature can improve the image quality. But by having to enable that feature, you're making the image blurrier overall. Yep. So this is where the whole ray tracing DLSS thing becomes very complicated. And yeah, it's also interesting I bring up the Gamers Nexus thing because I explained all of this in my recent conclusion that was extremely long when I compared the 3070 head-to-head with the 6800 in like 41 games. And I talked about the Cyberpunk in the conclusion with DLSS, how at the lower... Reviewers tend to review and evaluate DLSS at 4K with a 3080, and that is, like, as Tim's been saying, the best case scenario for DLSS image quality. But then once they've evaluated at 4K, they then show the benchmark results at varied resolutions where it actually doesn't look as good as it does at 4K because you have less data to work with.
Yeah, and it gets more complicated than that because it's not even the same per game.
Yes, well then, yeah, that's right.
Cyberpunk's implementation is not as good as like a Death Stranding or Wolfenstein Youngblood, which seem to be sort of the best examples of the technology. Whereas for me, like a Watch Dogs or Cyberpunk DLSS is not as good. And that's the image quality. And then the other thing is the performance. The performance is different in each game. A lot of people, or a lot of Nvidia fans, let's say, when they reading through the comments, they seem to be under the impression that the performance boost that is enabled by DLSS is like the 50% you see in Control. Yeah.
But I think like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it's like 8 to 10%, you see?
From DLSS.
From DLSS enabled.
And definitely in Death Stranding, if you're running at 100 plus FPS, then...
Yeah, and I think maybe the F1 games we'll have to see. But basically, you can get anywhere from 8% based on the data I've seen up to about 50%. So the performance gain is... It varies quite significantly. So image quality and performance will vary with DLSS on. There's no real, rule of thumb there where you get 50% more performance and the image quality is pretty close to native or whatever.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So yeah, like I said in a previous question, this might have been a previous part because it could have been a YouTube question, but I don't think this sort of technology is going away.
Mm-hmm.
I doubt that we will return to native rendering anytime soon because the balance between visuals and performance is too significant with these technologies to make it worth going back the other way.
Mm-hmm.
But my hope is that, number one, we get a universal solution, so a non-proprietary, works on all GPUs, so you can enable on your AMD, on your Nvidia, and your upcoming Intel GPUs, and gives you better quality. So it ends up improving over time to be better and better, and that will be a feature that will be much easier to benchmark. So right now it's quite difficult, but I think in the future, once we get these sort of agnostic features, like what has happened with, things we talked about like HBAO in the past and what's going to happen with ray tracing. Once we get all these things happening, then we'll get a better experience with these image reconstruction. It'll be easy to benchmark. We can benchmark with it on and get fair performance evaluations. Whereas for now, it is going to be this situation where we're going to be able to recommend it some of the time, not in other times. It's going to be very difficult to use it for benchmarking. It's just kind of the way that's going to have to be.
Mm-hmm.
All right, last question from the Patreon Q&A.
I like how the Patreon questions have been mostly aimed at Tim. I've been able to sit back and relax a bit.
Tim, I'm seeing lots of other tech channels saying that OLED at 60 Hz looks smoother / less blurry than LCD monitors at 144 Hz, or that OLED at 120 Hz looks smoother than LCD at 240 Hz. Do you have any thoughts on this? Is it worth diverting money from a high-end CPU GPU to an OLED screen? So I guess this is coming from the point that OLED displays have a lot lower response times. So if you've got an LCD that does like 5 milliseconds, then an OLED will typically do 1 millisecond or thereabouts with the same measurements. So that's obviously quite a significant reduction, and that will give you clearer images per frame because it can do the transitions much quicker. But that's only one part of the smoothness and blurriness equation. Definitely how often you get new frames also plays a big part. So for me, I have an OLED and I can run it at 60 Hz, so I can run it at 120 Hz if I want. A 60 Hz OLED is not equivalent to an LCD at 144 Hz for me in terms of smoothness. It's perhaps less blurry per frame, but overall the 120 Hz display is much smoother because you're getting more frames. So when you move your mouse, input lag is less.
I was going to say, it's the input.
Input lag is way less, so that impacts your experience a lot. And it just looks smoother because it is actually updating more often. And that's going to be true as well with the 120 Hz versus 240 Hz comparison. So OLED is great, but I don't think that the experience that some people here are saying is telling you the full story. Because, yeah, it's kind of that mix of you want low response times, but you also want as many frames as possible with the lowest possible lag. So when you get all those things happening, you get the ultimate experience. OLED provides one of those things. The LCD monitors provide the other two things. So
there's some truth at the core of the argument. It's been over-exaggerated.
Yeah, it's a similar argument to say using like a backlight strobing mode or a CRT that can do a very similar sort of, it flashes the image so you get very low blur. It's a very clear image, but it's not necessarily a smooth image because doing that at 60 Hz doesn't give you the same amount of frames. And I guess it depends how you experience games as to whether you find that more pleasant than having more frames. I'm more in I'd prefer the higher frame rate situation, even if it's a bit more blurry because of the input lag reasons and all that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Okay, so that is going to do it for this month's Q&A session. That is part 3 over. We are done, and we should hopefully have got that in January. If not, it'll be early February, and we'll have a whole new month of stuff to hopefully review. Hopefully there'll be... Who am I kidding? Nothing will be in stock. I don't know what we're doing here anymore. Anyway, we'll come up with something. We always seem to. But yeah, thanks for everyone who supported us this month and will continue their support. Of course, you can join us on Floatplane or Patreon. Links for that stuff are in the video description. You get access to ask us questions for Q&As like this one, so you're kind of doing some work for us. You can also join our Discord server, monthly live streams, behind the scenes videos. We do stuff, so if you're interested in seeing the stuff we do, then yeah, the links to that in the video description. But other than that, you got anything else to say, Tim?
No, I think that's all.
So this is your host, Tim.
That's right.
I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.